Hello everyone, it's Jabbar here. Today's video is a patron request. If you'd like to make a video request of your own, you could do so by becoming a patron. The link to this can be found below. And before we begin, I just want to make a special thanks to Matthew Man. He's been a patron of mine for several months, and he's also been making donations to several other channels just to get reaction videos and just in general get the From Nothing name out there, and I really appreciate that. So anyway, on to the video. When we look at the modern day populations that inhabit the continent of Africa, we find a wide variety of languages, ethnic groups, and cultures, more so than any other continent in the entire world. However, the scramble of Africa brought about dramatic changes to its people as a whole, including the introduction of European languages as the official languages of most of these countries. North Africa suffered a similar fate at the hands of Arab invaders during the Middle Ages, and as a result, virtually all of North Africa's countries are Islamic, speak Arabic languages, and share a strong affinity with Arabic peoples. Egypt's official name, for example, is the Arab Republic of Egypt. However, the invasions conducted by Arabs and Europeans were not the first to bring such dramatic changes to the ethnic, linguistic, or developmental makeup of Africa. In fact, the first, and arguably the most influential invasions of African lands happened 5,000 years ago, in a period that spanned roughly between 2500 BCE and 500 CE. These invaders, however, weren't from Europe or Asia, but Africa.
What? How the f*** are African gonna invade Africa if he already lived there? That's just stupid.
Never thought I'd say this, but for once I agree with you, man. How the hell are Negroes gonna invade Negro lands?
Well, see, these invaders, collectively known as the Bantu, are a linguistic superfamily, and were not historically indigenous to all of Africa. While they do inhabit the majority of the continent today, their ancestral homeland consisted of just a small grassy region in West Africa, in an area roughly between the borders of Nigeria and Cameroon. Moving to the north of them were the closely related Atlantic Congo West African peoples, followed by the Nilo-Saharan and afro-asiatic peoples of North and Northeast Africa. The afro-asiatic peoples tend to have more phenotypic, linguistic, and cultural similarities to Europeans and West Asians than other African groups do. Though this isn't always the case, as some of these groups possess more genetic and cultural affinities with West Africans and Nilotes. The Nilo-Saharan peoples, or more specifically the Nilotic, are typically a very dark-skinned people of tall and slender stature, with the average adult male standing 6'2". To the south of the Bantu, in a region roughly corresponding with the Congo rainforest, lived a hunter-gatherer people of incredibly small stature, with the average adult male standing about 4'9", over a full foot shorter than the former. These people are most frequently referred to as pygmies, though this term is often looked upon as a pejorative one, with these people preferring to be referred to by their respective ethnic groups instead. But for the sake of this video, and with no offense intended, I'm gonna refer to them as pygmies only because I honestly don't know what to call them as a group collectively. Moving further south, spanning roughly the southern half of the continent and much of East Africa, were hunter-gatherer peoples collectively referred to as Bushmen, Khoisan, or Hottentots, whom also view these terms as pejorative in favor of their respective ethnic groups, and I honestly don't blame them because I wouldn't want to be called a Bushman either. They are fair in complexion when compared to other African populations, while also featuring epicanthic folds or Asian eyes. This often forms the basis of many pseudo-historians' claims of African origins of East Asian civilizations. These groups have indeed been proven to possess the mitochondrial progenitors of all anatomically modern humans within their populations. However, they are more closely related genetically to other Africans such as the Pygmies or the Bantu peoples, not East Asians. As much as I'd like to break down these groups in more detail, I'm going to get back to the Bantu expansion. The Pygmies and Khoisan populations were the most heavily affected by the Bantu expansions because for the most part, they lacked pottery, agriculture, or iron tools, and thus their populations were smaller and more scattered in comparison to the Bantu invaders. The main driving factors to the Bantu expansions are unclear, but it is generally believed that a catalyst to this expansion may have been triggered by the drying of the climate in West Central Africa 2,500 years ago, and that may have driven them to colonize new lands. Rapidly increasing populations after the development of farming and cattle herding may have also been a driving factor. Due to these rapidly increasing populations, in addition to the need for more pastures to herd their cattle. Whatever the causes, the Bantu expansion is one of the largest migrations in human history and one of the fastest for such a vast region. It also happened in more or less of a north-south pattern, which has been shown time and time again to heavily slow or impede altogether migrations of humans, plants, and animals alike. as climate zones change dramatically when moving in a north to south orientation. This is evident in trade patterns, spread of technology, spread of disease, and general orientations of states and empires usually favoring an east to west orientation. Empires and trade routes like the Roman Empire, the Silk Road, or the Mongol Empire. The archaeological record indicates that the initial expansion was very slow, with populations moving only roughly 124 miles south of their homeland in present-day Yaoundé, in a period spanning between 5,000 and 3,000 years ago. During this time, these migrants would have still been using stone tools and weapons, but much more advanced than the ones used by the inhabitants of the land south of them, featuring innovations like polished tools and large axe heads. Farming may have also been absent, though further research and archaeology needs to be done to confirm or deny this fact. Whether they had farming or not, their more advanced tools and possession of pottery would have allowed for much more efficient processing, transport, and storage of food stocks than their rivals. However, this slow and methodical migration didn't last forever. Sites excavated in the Congo Basin, West Central Africa, and the Great Lakes region of East Africa indicate rapid expansion with several migrations happening at roughly around the same time. Around 2,500 years ago, and just 500 years later, they had already reached South Africa. This series of rapid expansions is attributed to the fact that this time frame corresponds with the development of iron technology by the Bantu people. This is evident in the Urewe culture of the African Great Lakes, an agricultural people dating back to as early as 600 BCE and lasting until about 600 CE, or 1,000 years, notable for their unique and distinct traditions of pottery and ironsmithing, the latter incorporating some of the most advanced steel-making technology in history that wasn't learned in the West until 1847 by an American blacksmith named William Kelly. So moving backwards just a bit, due to their proximity to the Bantu, the Pygmies were the first to be invaded, and in addition to the aforementioned disadvantages, their small stature would have severely crippled their ability to defend themselves against these giant invaders from the north. Historical tensions between the two groups has been prominent, and even to present day, Pygmies face intense discrimination from neighboring Bantus. Most Pygmy people still live in their ancestral homeland, but their populations are now heavily fragmented into several distinct groups, and this has been the case for at least 2,800 years, or roughly during the era of the Bantu expansion. Their modern-day populations feature prominent Bantu admixture, but not so much the other way around. It is generally accepted that the Bantu expansion is responsible for the fragmentation of Pygmy populations, and the subsequent formation of many more diverse Pygmy ethnic groups. The Khoisan peoples were similar to the Pygmies in the fact that they were also small-statured hunter-gatherers or nomadic herders. The word Khoisan actually denotes two distinct groups, with the Khoikhoi being nomadic herders, who migrated south from present-day Botswana, and the San being hunter-gatherers whom were already present in southern Africa. Both groups share a common and recent ancestor, and once spanned all of eastern Africa, central Africa, and southern Africa. However, once the Bantu arrived, they effectively drove both groups to the Kalahari Desert, where most of them still reside to this day. Small pockets of them still exist in and around their ancestral homelands, but are heavily fragmented, just as what happened with Pygmy peoples. By 500 CE, the Bantu had brought the entire African continent into the Iron Age. Even those groups that didn't forge iron tools on their own still exclusively used them and acquired them primarily through trade. Agriculture and/or cattle herding had also been universally adopted, except in areas where it was simply infeasible, such as the Kalahari Desert, which is where the San people were restricted to after the Bantu expansion. West Africans, North Africans, and Northeast Africans were virtually unaffected by the Bantu expansion for the most part, since they already had thriving populations of equal or greater sophistication to those of the Bantu. This prevented northward expansion since the Bantu lacked the advantages they had over Africa's southern inhabitants. A series of kingdoms and states rose and fell throughout Africa's history immediately following the Bantu expansion, with remnants of great stone cities spanning thousands of miles across southern Africa, as well as seafaring Swahili cities that dot the East African coast. While the Swahili language and culture bear strong Arabic influence, they are still Bantu creations. Swahili is a Bantu language, their ships were built by Bantu people, and their cities were ruled by Bantu men. The Great Congo Kingdom of Central Africa was also a Bantu creation, developing a large empire with complex and sophisticated culture despite being virtually isolated from groups like Eurasians and even West Africans and North Africans, until the Portuguese first made contact with them in the 15th century. They also became the first sub-Saharan African people to adopt Christianity, with the exception of Ethiopia and the Nubian kingdoms. In conclusion, Africa has seen dramatic influxes of foreign cultures that forever changed the face of the continent, by European powers in the modern era, and Arabs in the Middle Ages, and by Bantu peoples in prehistoric times. A typical image we have of the average African is something that historically has only existed in a small region of West Central Africa, while the remainder of the continent was home to several very different populations with vastly different physical appearances, cultural norms, and linguistic families. In a time roughly contemporary with the pharaohs, the Bantu people were partaking in one of the largest, fastest, and most influential migrations in human history, forever changing the face of Africa. Today, 1/3 of all Africans belong to the Bantu superfamily, and over 500 Bantu languages are spoken on the continent as a whole. As I mentioned at the beginning, this video was requested by a patron, and if you'd like to make an awesome request of your own, you can do so by becoming a patron. Your pledge directly supports the channel and contributes towards the betterment of my content and the African history community as a whole. Thanks for watching, guys, and always remember, we don't come from nothing.